And I'm going to turn on live captions, so that can help if you can't understand what I'm saying. Hopefully the microphone understands what I'm saying, and it'll put it at the bottom. It unfortunately doesn't seem to record the captions, so that's a little unfortunate. But I am recording the meeting now, so students who come late can watch that. So anytime that you come late or miss a lecture, feel free to watch the recording afterwards. Any students that are in the meeting, if you notice that you haven't seen the "this meeting is being recorded" thing at the top of your screen, let me know. Write a comment, say, hey, the meeting's not being recorded. Don't forget that for the other students. All right, so this is me, Professor Riches. This is my family. And these are my cats. So I'm a cat person most of the time. Sometimes when they're meowing at 2 a.m., I'm not so much of a cat person. I'd rather they go away and I sleep. But this one up here, this is River. This one is Misty, and this long hair one is Shadow. This is another picture of Shadow too, just going to eat some birds. All right, so with this class, I work a lot with other grad students and doing research papers. So sometimes I might use language that's unintentionally more professional or academic. I might say terms that you just don't understand, that you didn't see in the book, and that's really my fault. So I try to use words that you've been exposed to already in the class, but if there's something that I say or a term that I use that you don't understand, please do let me know, so that raise your hand, put a comment in here, say, oh, I don't know what context means, or something like that. So I can explain it so that everybody's clear about what's going on. All right, so one thing that I would like us to do, again, you don't have to have your camera on for this, but I would like you to turn your microphones on for this, is to talk about yourselves, to get to know each other. I'm going to, as you're doing that, add a couple more students to the class, because I hear a bunch of dings on my end that there are some students wanting to get in. So from this, just go through, say your names. I'm not sure if all of the students see people in the same order as I do. So on my screen, I see Lindsay on my top left, Corey, Marion, Richard, and after that I see Rianne, and then Destiny. So is that the same order other students are seeing people as little icons on their screen?
No.
Okay, so it's completely different. In that case, maybe I will just call out a person's name from the order that I see as we're going through this. Just let us know your name. From this, pick which of these colors is closest to your favorite color. So my favorite color is green. So I'm Professor Riches. My favorite color is green. So who is my favorite superhero? It's Batman. With that, I'm really excited for the upcoming Batman movie. Had a trailer just released the other day. And then what psych subjects am I most interested in? I'm most interested in positive developmental psychology, helping people do good in their lives. So something like that, just a little response. And pay attention to what your peers talk about, because you'll find that some peers have similar interests. And that'll be relevant for an assignment that we do later in the semester. Maybe it'll be, some of these peers will be people that you want to join up with in groups. So let's start off with maybe luckily or unluckily, Lindsay Mathis, it looks like, is the first on my list. So go ahead, let us know your name, let us know which of these is your favorite color, and then also what psych subject you are most interested in at the moment.
Okay, my favorite color is purple. So who would you want to play you in a movie of your life? Probably Charlize Theron. And my favorite psych, or what psych subject I'm most interested in? Probably anything PTSD, trauma related.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing. So with that, if there are any other students who are interested in that same kind of topic, remember that. Maybe write down Lindsay's name so you can maybe contact her later, email, and get in a group for one of the activities that we'll do as a class. I guess a little spoiler for that is later on in the class, you'll start creating a presentation from one of the topics that we're going to cover in the class. So things like treatments for disorders is one of those kinds of topics. So if there's multiple people that are interested in treatments for disorders, you could all get in a group. Lindsay, for example, could talk about or write some slides similar to these slides that you're looking at right here. Similar to that, write some slides about that topic. There's a rubric on Canvas, things like that. So we'll go over it in a lot more detail later on, a little bit more later on today too. But just so you know kind of what the idea is behind getting to know our interests. So thank you very much. Let's move on to the next student that I can see here, Corey Gilbert.
My name is Corey Gilbert, and my favorite color is blue, so my favorite hobby is probably paddleboarding at the moment. My favorite psych subjects would probably be like adolescence and just how the brain develops through that age group. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Adolescence is a passion of mine as well. As you could see earlier, a lot of my research has been with that kind of age group. So my monitor just went black for a minute, and so I wonder, could you still see it even though I wasn't getting signal from my monitor? Okay, great. All right, the next person up is Miriam Cardenas. So go for it. I've almost got all the students added now.
Okay, so the closest color for me would be blue as well. So my favorite hobby, I would say, is painting. I like to paint. And for the subject I'm most interested in, I would say like personality disorders.
It's definitely an interesting one, personality disorders. It's one that we'll cover in the last half of the class, but definitely just a little bit before we do those presentations. So if there's anyone else interested in any of these topics, again, write down these students' names so that you know who they are, so then you can get in contact with them. All right, so the next person that I have here is Richard Mashner, and I apologize if I screw up anybody's names.
No worries. It's Richard Marshner. It's easier than it looks, but Marshner. I'm going to just answer yellow because I really love chips and salsa. It's not necessarily my favorite color, but I don't know that too many people like yellow that much. So chips and salsa it is. I love Mexican food. I am actually, my job is a coach, so I kind of am interested in kind of sports related stuff, why people perform better or worse just due to the mental aspect, not necessarily anything physical, but the mental aspect of sport, I guess.
That's perfect. Thank you. With that, we do have some discussions of sports psychology specifically throughout the lessons. There's no big chapter specifically on sports psychology, but with any of these topics, it is a good area for question papers. So question papers are something we'll talk about in a little more detail in a minute as well. A question paper is a research paper that you can do on a topic of interest to you, where you'll find some extra research outside of the book, at least one research article, peer-reviewed research article, so something from like the Journal of Science or the Journal of Adolescent Development. There's multiple journals on sports psychology or exercise science, so finding at least one journal article from there. You can also use a website as a resource. So doing that and then writing a short one-page report about that research in APA format. And then from that, you will learn a lot and you'll be able to share some of that information and learn how to do research and how to present research. So it's a really fun assignment. I find students at the beginning are a little bit hesitant about it because it seems like a big thing, but then by the end, they seem to like it a lot and they've improved their skills greatly. So if there are topics that we don't cover enough in class, it is definitely a good place to do a question paper on. All right, so the next one we have here is Lauren Pierce. Looks like Lauren is not commenting, so earlier Lauren said that her camera didn't work, so perhaps her microphone isn't working as well. So that's all right. We'll move on to the next student that I can see here, Rianne Rendon.
Chat right now. Just in the chat.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So Lauren's doing it in the chat. Feel free to open the chat so you can see what she says about herself. All right, we might have other technical difficulties with Lauren typing and connecting, so let's move on to the next person I see on my list here, Julie Lazar. Oh, Lauren was just typing. That's too bad. It doesn't show that someone is typing. So Lauren says favorite superhero is Iron Man and is interested in behavioral analysis and family counseling. Well, great. Those topics will be really useful for a lot of those chapters that we will be covering. So we'll talk about applied behavioral analysis specifically in chapters 12 and 13, and a lot of the topics that we discuss throughout the book will also be relevant to family counseling. All right, so Julie, you had a minute to think, an extra minute, so your turn now.
Doesn't mean I'm still not terrified. Yeah, so I'm Julie Lazari. My favorite color is actually yellow too, Richard. And my endless supply of food would be close to yours, tacos. I could eat them for every meal. What I'm most interested in, I guess it would be behavior that has to do with maybe childhood trauma. And, you know, I'm kind of more into natural things, so maybe natural therapies that could help that.
Fantastic. Yeah, so it sounds like we've got a couple people interested in tacos and Mexican food, so that could be a good reason to join a group, as well as treatments for different disorders and trauma. So maybe some ideas of how to connect for when you're creating groups in the future. So thank you. All right, so the next person I see on my list is Destiny Duran. So go for it.
My name is Destiny. My favorite color is blue, and I'm really into journaling and softball. And I'm really interested in social psychology and how interacting with different people affects your brain.
Thank you very much. All right, let's keep going. It looks like someone else jumped up as I clicked on Destiny's name. So hopefully I don't miss anybody as I'm going through these. So the next person I see is Flavia Anderson. Or perhaps I said it completely wrong, and I'm sorry.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yep, I can. Yep, go for it.
I just joined. What was the question? What was it that we're saying?
Oh, sorry. So what we're doing is just introducing ourselves. We're saying from these colors that we can see on the screen, which one is closest to your favorite color, and based on that, answer that question. So what is your favorite hobby, for example? And then after that, what psych subject are you most interested in? And we're trying to learn what people are interested in so that we can later join groups with other people with similar interests and do a kind of presentation with them towards the end of the class. So name, answer one of these questions. What topic in psychology are you interested in?
Okay. Um, name's Flavia Anderson. My the food would be any kind of Mexican food. And then can't think of right now the psychology question.
Yeah, no problem. We're just getting started. So I'm sure a lot of you won't have any specific interest yet. Maybe you're just taking this as a general course, but hopefully by the end of the course, you have a couple different topics that you are really interested in and you know a lot more about. So thank you very much. The next person I can see on my list here is Don Grover.
Hi, I'm Dawn. My favorite color is pink, and so the closest one to that is probably red. I was trying to think. This is a hard one, but I feel like not paying bills or anything like that. So if it was just play money, I would probably. I've always wanted to like open a little bakery or like lunch shop. I think that would be really cool. Or I would just like do nothing and go backpack all over the world. So, oh, and then psych subjects. That is a good question because I feel like I have so many interests that I haven't really narrowed it down, and that's why I'm here. So we'll go with that. Positive psychology is a good one. I like that, but I don't know. That's what I'm majoring in. And again, that's why I'm here. So to try to figure that out.
Perfect. Well, a general psych course is the perfect one to figure out which interest in psychology is your favorite. And taking it for me is a really good one if you're interested in positive psych. That's what my math or PhD is positive developmental psychology. So I've had classes with Gene Nakamura and Mike Csikszentmihalyi. So yeah, know a little bit about positive psychology, and it's something that I like talking about. So I'll bring it in to class quite a bit, a lot more than is in the book just by itself. So great to meet you. All right, the next student I see on my list here is Linda. Linda Mejia, I believe. So go for it.
Awesome. Can you guys hear me? Okay. Okay. So my name is Linda Mejia. You said it perfect. I would pick blue. I really like playing sports. I like playing basketball and also volleyball. And what psych subject are you most interested in? Would be childhood development and then also adolescence. I want to go into juvenile justice. I want to be a lawyer. So that would help a lot with what I want to be.
Fantastic. Good to meet you. My first internship was actually at a juvenile correction center. So it was really interesting applying the psychology I was learning and seeing it applied. It was really the first time I was seeing that. So I didn't know too much back then, but now I know a lot more. So I feel like I could have been a lot more use going back now at this point than I was kind of just wide-eyed and just taking everything in. But great. Good to meet you. All right, so the next student I've got on my list, I think we've already talked. Yep, it looks like my names have reorganized as more students have jumped in. I hope after this class I can figure out how to keep students' names in order, hopefully alphabetical, so this doesn't happen. So let's jump to Asher Sonreich or Sonreich. or perhaps another way to pronounce it that I am completely messing up. So I'm sorry about that.
You're fine. No one can pronounce it. So for me, I think my favorite color is blue. So my favorite hobby is knitting. And for psych subjects that I'm interested in abnormal psychology.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I'm actually a little surprised we haven't heard more people interested in abnormal psychology. We've had a couple that are touching on therapies for different things, but not so many for abnormal. It's usually one of the more popular ones in general psych. So we'll get to that near the end of the course. So basically, I want students to have a good basis of understanding of a lot of different aspects of psychology before we dive into the abnormal psychology. So I think it helps to understand that, as well as it's like chapters 12 and 13 in the book. And we kind of follow along with the chapters. We go like 1, 2, 3, 4, but then we jump to 8. So we mix it around a little bit. All right, so let's continue on. Let's go to Maro Celis.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can.
Okay. So my name is Maro, and my favorite color is blue. So my favorite hobby would definitely have to be playing basketball. And the subject I'm most interested in, since I've always been a sports person, would probably just be sports psychology. Similar to what the other guy in here said, the coach, why people perform better or worse in sports. And that's it.
Fantastic. Well, maybe a good person to get with to make a group to present something. In previous semesters, when we've been face-to-face, students have actually presented it in front of other students. In this broadcast version, you can either record something to present to students or just have a slide presentation that you'll upload. So that'll be the final product, essentially, of that assignment. So have we heard from Daisy yet?
Okay, so my name's Daisy. Favorite color would be orange. And then my favorite hobby would have to be sewing. And then what psych subject? I haven't taken, this is like the first psych class I've taken. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Well, then hopefully you find a lot of things that interest you in psychology. With that, I think we may have had introductions from everybody here in the meeting. I know there's some students who are having trouble logging into Canvas as well as Outlook. So there's not some students who aren't here at all that we'll meet later on. Is there anybody, feel free to write in the chat if I've missed you, because I might just not see your initials. I think one thing that we'll do if we're going to keep using Microsoft Teams is make sure everybody can get a different avatar, because there's some initials that have similar colors and similar initials. All right. Perfect. So looks like we missed quite a few. So let's go to Arlie app. Go for it.
Okay, and it's Ariel. I know that's different spelling than normal. And my favorite color is purple. So I've never had to think about this question before, but if I had to decide, I'd probably pick Julia Roberts because she plays characters that kind of represent like my passion, like in Erin Brockovich, you know, she fights for what she believes in and makes a difference. So that's probably why I'd pick her. I'm a social work major and I just transferred to the U, but my psychology class is over 10 years old. So I've already taken this class, but I need to refresh it. Last time I took it, I loved it. And my psychology teacher in Washington State asked me to be a tutor for upcoming semesters, and I was honored. I never actually got a chance to do that, but I love psychology very much. It'll definitely go hand in hand with a social work degree and what I want to do with it. I'm looking more to be in macro social work, so kind of learning a lot about political science and how the system works to see how I can like make some change. And if I had to choose a psych subject that I'm most interested in, I probably would choose one that's very unpopular. And I'm always the girl in social work class who wants to work with people that like murderers or child abusers or anything like that. I'm interested in helping people that most of society just casts aside. So that's what I would be interested in.
I think we lost the professor.
Yeah, I think we did too. Oh, well.
We'll just hang out and look at each other.
All right. That's fine with me. There he is.
Sorry about that. My meeting just froze. So I wonder if the recording was continuing while you were all here and I was gone. So that'll be something to check later on. So glad you're still here. Sorry about that. So thank you, Ariel. I'm glad you took a psych class before. I hope that you've got a lot to share with the rest of the class then. Let's jump forward to Will Weeks.
My name is Will. My favorite color is blue. My favorite hobby is probably skiing, and I'm interested in childhood development.
Perfect. Childhood development is definitely one of the more popular areas of developmental psychology. We'll talk about it a lot in our chapters on development. Well, chapter in this textbook's case. There's a lot of people who research child development and fewer that research adolescence and fewer that research adulthood and even fewer that research late adulthood. So it's kind of an interesting phenomenon. But yep, there's a lot of information on child development. So you'll be able to find a lot of good stuff for that. All right, let's continue to Carter Whalen.
My name is Carter Wallen, and my favorite color is green. So my favorite superhero is Iron Man. And my favorite subject is social psychology.
All right, perfect. There are a lot of interesting things in social psychology. You probably know a couple experiments. So Stanford Prison Study, Milgram's study of obedience, those kinds of things. A lot of the unethical studies we talk about or that people talk about in the news or on shows, it was pretty much all social psychologists. So I say this as someone who started in social psychology and then defected over to developmental psychology. So I feel like I can say bad things about social psychology, but no, it's great. It's not quite like that now. We'll talk about that really soon with ethics as well. How a lot of social psych studies led to a lot of the ethical rules that we as psychologists now follow. So fantastic. All right, let's go now to Miriam.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yep, we can.
Okay, my name is Miriam. My favorite color is probably closest to blue, so my favorite hobby is to play games. And I took a general class in high school, so I'm not really sure what I'm interested in, but I'm excited to learn some stuff.
Well, great. A lot of the things that you hear about in this class will be review, and then we'll go hopefully a little bit beyond that too. So general classes in high school tend to be fairly similar to the general class in college at this level, at the freshman level, the 10-10 level. But hopefully we go just a little bit beyond what you learned in high school as well, because we kind of pack it in a little more, it's a little more dense, but we're glad you're here. All right, so let's move on to Dylan Reiser.
Hi, my name is Dylan Reiser. My favorite color is blue, so my favorite hobby would have to be baseball. I play baseball on the team here at Slick. So my favorite subject would definitely have to be sports psychology, so I can get into that and learn more. So yeah.
Fantastic. So if I'm not losing count, that's 3 or maybe 4 interests in sports psychology in this class. So maybe a good group to get together and look into more research on sports psychology and doing a little presentation for the rest of the class. All right. So I've mispronounced quite a few of your names, so I apologize for that. But Rianne Rendon.
Hi, it's Ryan Rendon. And then my favorite color is blue, and my favorite hobby is golfing, and my favorite subject for psychology is social psychology.
Fantastic. Well, we've got a couple interests in social psychology, and there's definitely a lot of those interesting experiments to talk about. Or even more new aspects of social psychology would be a great thing to present on. So maybe make a note of who are the people who are interested in that so you can join a group, because that is definitely a easy topic to find information for. All right, so let's continue on. I think we might have got everybody now that I have in the class. So did we hear from Carter Whalen? I believe we did. Is there anyone else that I thought so. Is there anyone we're missing then that didn't get to introduce himself?
I did not go yet. Parker Schaefer.
Go for it then.
Sorry, my login was incorrect, so I had to wait for IT. My favorite color is green. My favorite hobby is mountain biking, and sports psychology would definitely be the one I'm most interested in.
Perfect. So I think that's now 4 or 5 just in sports psychology. All right, so I think now at this point we've got everybody. I know there will be more students who come in later weeks because other students were having trouble logging in as well. So hopefully we can get all these technical problems worked out before our next class meeting next Tuesday at the same time. And probably for that meeting, we'll also be using Microsoft Teams as long as everything else continues about as well/poorly as it has so far with Microsoft Teams today. Let me know if anybody here has had any really serious problems. Like mine froze, and so I had to come back into the meeting. If yours froze and it kicked you out, you weren't able to come in, send me an email afterwards. Let me know the kinds of problems you were having. I'll see if there's anything I can do on my end to fix that, or we might just jump to a different platform. Like I said, I do have more experience with Zoom, but I was under the impression up until earlier this afternoon that we were strongly recommended not to use Zoom. But now the university does have their own Zoom account, so we can use that. So we might move over there. All right, but now let's continue on. Let's learn a little bit about psychology and review the syllabus. Before we do that, let's take a quick break. So essentially for this break, I'm going to keep the meeting running. I'll just turn off my camera and microphone and take about a 4-minute break. So at about 7:55, we'll come back, have a little more of our meeting. We'll review a little bit of the syllabus, and that'll give me a chance to try and get anybody else in who's still trying to add. I haven't heard as many email dings, so I think some students may have given up at this point, but I'll see if I can help them get back in. So I'll see you back again at 7:55, and we will have the rest of our meeting. Oh, well, we're almost back. I didn't unmute my microphone. So we're back. Let's talk a little bit about the syllabus. So as we're here coming back from the break, any students who want to can feel free to keep your cameras off during these meetings, keep your microphones off unless it's time to talk about something. So whether I call on you or whether you mark something in the chat. Like I said, it doesn't seem like the hand raise feature is actually working. It's not giving me any kind of notification, at least when I've been testing it. So put things in the chat and I will see them. But right now, let's talk about the syllabus a little bit. So first, one of the most important things on this syllabus is our textbook. So, but maybe before that, I'll let you see where my email and things like that are, so you know where to contact me. So our lectures are always the same on Tuesdays from 7 to 9:50. Some weeks we'll make it all the way to 9:50. Some weeks we'll probably be a little short. Today will probably be a little bit short of that, depending on how much content we cover, how quickly. So feel free to email me here, brian.riches@slcc.edu, but you can also use the Canvas inbox to email. So I will actually pull that up so you can see where to do that. Some of you are new to Canvas, but to email, you can go to inbox. Right now I've got a couple messages from students, maybe even some of you, that have sent me things during the course of this meeting. So go to inbox, you can see messages from students, messages that you, or messages from me. You can send me messages, so your inbox can be accessed over here on the left side of Canvas. So you can contact me that way. You can also contact me by just emailing me from personal or from Outlook or from your Bruin email. And I will tend to respond in about 24 hours. If it's a weekend or a holiday, it will probably be a little bit longer than that. So if you email me Friday night at 5 p.m. or something like that, I might not be responding to it until, say, Monday morning. All right, so our textbook is actually available to you already. So our textbook is completely online through Canvas. It's through something called McGraw-Hill Connect. So with it, it gives us the opportunity to essentially give you a chapter quiz as you're reading through the material. And that chapter quiz feature today and yesterday, as I was trying to set it up and give you due dates for those, wasn't actually working, but everybody should have access to the textbook. So you don't need to pay any extra fees. You don't need to buy a physical copy of the textbook. To get to the textbook, make sure you are in our page on Canvas. So like this. So you should see it a little bit differently than I do. Oh, that's not what I wanted to see. I wanted to see student view. I clicked before it was fully loaded. That's all right. I will just, here we go. We'll just keep it in my view. Yours looks a little bit different. Yours has some these chapter smart books, I haven't got them to work yet because of McGraw-Hill actually. But here in the left, in these blue links, you should see one that is McGraw-Hill Connect. That is your textbook. So right now, if you go and click on McGraw-Hill Connect, it will open up and you will be able to log in and have access to our textbook. So right now it should say link a Connect session or go to my Connect section to you. Click on that. You're automatically linked to our course and our textbook. Of course, I don't like pop-ups, so I disallow them always. But the first time you come here, you'll see it ask you to log in, things like that. But it should take you to a page that looks very similar to this. And from this page, you can then read the chapters. So you can go to chapter 1, chapter 2. When you click into a chapter, you can then kind of page through and even section forward. But this is where our chapters are. You'll see something more like this page right here. And I'll show you your smart book right now. All right, so it says past due because I copied over assignments from a previous course. So what you can do, you can either start with reading in these smart books, or you can start with questions. So the questions are essentially 10 to 14 questions per chapter about the content in the chapter. As you read through, you can then read the whole chapter, then answer the questions, or you can read up to a highlighted portion, answer the question on that highlighted portion, and then continue reading. So let's show you what that looks like. Let's start with reading. Here's the beginning of the textbook. So defining psychology and exploring its roots. Here we see psychology is a scientific study of behavior and mental processes. Let's consider these three key terms: science, behavior, and mental processes. So we'll talk about that in our slides today as well, because all of our lectures kind of expand on the content from the book. So I expect you to come to class having read the book, or at least most of the chapter, by the time that we're talking about it in class. Obviously today, you've only just now had access to the book, so I don't expect you to have read this yet. But in the next week or so, before our next meeting, hopefully you read through this and maybe even into chapter 2 as well. So this highlighted section indicates that there is a question, one of your quiz questions on that topic. So we can say, okay, so I read that. Let's go to questions. Psychologists study, well, let's look behavior and mental processes. So this is a silly thing, but it asks you your confidence level here. It doesn't really give me any detail. I think this gives McGraw-Hill data so that they can know how to revise the textbook. So let's say I think I know this one. Oh, look, I'm correct. So essentially for these SmartBook assignments, that's what you do. You can also go back to reading, and you can read through this whole section. So this is all section 1. And then you can go to the next concept, paging up over here. So you can go to the next highlight. So there's another question on this topic. There's another question on this topic. So you can go through like that to find the questions as well. Or you can just continue reading through the chapters. So scrolling through, paging forward, that kind of thing. And then after you finish reading the chapter, then you can go back to the questions, do them all at once. So if you know you have only 30 minutes to read and you know you're not going to make it through the whole chapter in that time, you can read what you are able to in say 20 minutes, then answer all the questions that you've covered so far. So, or you can wait till you finish the whole chapter, answer all the questions. You don't have to get them all right to get 100% on this assignment. So the smart books are essentially just graded on completion. So if you've read through the whole chapter, if you've answered all the questions, you'll get 100%, and that will transfer straight to the grade book. So once I have the settings all correct. So I've had different problems with Connect before, never this specific one. So again, you can find this from you can find your textbook from our page in Canvas. Again, if there are any questions, so like there's a question in the chat right now, are we graded on the questions? The answer to that is no. So here on the blue, you can click to McGraw-Hill Connect and go to your Connect session. And then from that, you can start reading the book and answering questions. So again, it's graded on completion. If you are only able to make it through half of the book and answer half of the questions before the due date, you'll get 50%. If you answer all of them and 7 of the 10 questions are wrong, but you've done all of the questions all the way through, you will still be able to get 100% completion. Yeah, the questions are a learning tool, and you can go back and redo and re-review those questions if you want. But really, it's just to show me that you have been reading through, that you've been trying, and you have been learning. So yeah, right now the due dates for all of these assignments, say it's from spring semester, it's having a problem right now. It won't let me update the due dates, but they'll be up soon. Start reading chapter 1. And then I'll send an email when it's working, when everybody's quizzes should be working. But for right now, just start with your reading. So I've got to contact McGraw-Hill support. No other faculty knew what to do when I checked with them first. If it doesn't have chapter 1, feel free to use the concept button to click back and just click all the way back. If you can jump straight into chapter 2 or 3 or 4, you can jump all the way straight back. All right, so that. I also want to show you our schedule. So if you look at our schedule in our syllabus, I've also uploaded the schedule separately. You'll see the Smart Book for Chapter 1 is due next Tuesday just before midnight. So generally, that's when the Smart Books are due. I may have actually decided to keep them all due. Yep, it looks like it, even on holiday weeks. So the Smart Books are due on Tuesday after class. Again, I do hope that you read the book before coming to class, because today in lecture, as well as next week in lecture, we'll be talking about Chapter 1, and we'll probably jump to Chapter 2. So that's what this kind of colors indicate on the schedule. The purple, it's like, well, this is the first chapter in the unit. Blue is this is the second chapter in the unit. So that's about when you should be reading them. And then this teal is the third chapter in the unit. And then it ends on the day you have Chapter 3 Smart Book quiz. So next Tuesday, it'll be working by then. I suspect the due dates and the quizzes should be working correctly by tomorrow afternoon. So tomorrow, start reading your book, and then you can complete all the questions before this time. All right, any other questions about the Smart Book and accessing the Smart Book? If you're still having trouble not being able to navigate through that concepts button back and forth, let me know. Maybe send me a screenshot of any error messages that you're seeing so I can help you more specifically as well. Other things on the schedule you might want to be aware of. For Labor Day weekend, Canvas is going to be getting some maintenance, so it will actually be completely unavailable from the 4th all the way through the 7th. So do your reading for that chapter a little early, maybe take screenshots, things like that. Maybe I'll actually send a PDF copy of Chapter 2 to everybody. Maybe I'll send a PDF of Chapters 1, 2, and 3. I think I'll do that actually. Let me write myself a note really quick. That way, even if you don't have access to Canvas, during that weekend, you'll still have access to those chapters 1 through 3, just in a PDF copy. Can't really send, legally, I can't really send any more than that because publishers get really mad when you give away their books. So, but they don't frown too much about sending a couple chapters, especially as students are getting into a class and getting added, getting their books shipped, things like that. Again, for us, we don't actually need to ship books. It's all available through Canvas. All right, so let's look back at the syllabus, some other things. Do review this whole syllabus. I'm definitely not going to read this whole thing to you right now. It would probably put me to sleep, honestly. Maybe even before it put you to sleep. Who knows? Depends who's had more coffee, I guess. So some things you need: reliable internet. As we can see, mine got a little unreliable and shut down the meeting. So the more you can reduce that, the better. So whether that means sitting in your car near a coffee shop to do the to listen to lectures, waiting and watching the recordings after class periods, it's definitely better to be able to interact when we are doing things like discussions. Right now, I'm basically just talking about the syllabus, so there's not a lot of interaction, but hopefully most of our lectures will have a lot more back and forth and discussion than just going over a syllabus. Some learning outcomes, learn what you're expected, what's expected of you. E-portfolio, do read this. If you've been in a general course at Salt Lake Community College, you'll know what these are, what e-portfolios are. Otherwise, read this, but don't worry too much about it yet until near the end of the semester. So again, Canvas is our main course management tool. So Canvas looks like, let's jump back to it. Canvas looks like this. So Canvas is where we will do most everything of turning in assignments, where all the assignments are uploaded, that kind of thing. So it's also where exams are. You might not be able to see this exam yet, but exam 1 will be due September 19th. And so you'll access that through Canvas. You can email me through the inbox in Canvas. There is a lot of documentation posted on Canvas. So most of the entire class is just entirely on Canvas. And then we're using, right now, Microsoft Teams to do our broadcast lectures. So you can imagine Microsoft Teams is kind of this is our classroom, essentially, versus Canvas is where our kind of Dropbox, our file system, where you turn in assignments, that kind of thing. Connect is that McGraw-Hill thing that we were just looking at. So that's where you read your textbook. You have practice quizzes available there if you want to use those. The SmartBook assignments are through Connect, and the completion grade links straight back to Canvas, the gradebook there. So definitely familiarize yourself with this netiquette policy, especially since a lot of what we're doing is online. So in Canvas as well as here, a lot of your other classes might be completely online as well, or a broadcast like this. So using proper writing style, no yelling, citing your sources. This is a big one as we're doing papers as well, is to cite your sources. Sometimes it might reference, say, a discussion board here. We don't actually have discussion boards at this point in this class. I don't suspect we will. But if these discussion teams on video don't work out so well, we might move to discussion boards. Read everything first, attempt to find your own answer before asking questions, like say in the syllabus, for example. A lot of times I get questions that are just easily found in the syllabus. So maybe just do something like this. You can click Control F, and let's say you want to know about plagiarism. Well, maybe I should have picked a different word. I'm not sure I can spell plagiarism. My wife's walking past. She's laughing at me for not spelling well. And now she's laughing at me more. And it's all being recorded, so I'll watch this later and laugh. So if you want to know about plagiarism, you can search that, Control F. Oh, look, here we have our policy of academic honesty. So read through that, has some exercises to understand plagiarism. So if you have questions about things, if you want to find the schedule or something like that, go to the syllabus and see if you can find that in the syllabus already. There are quite a few pages of a lot of content. It's essentially the contract for the class. And yeah. So other things that we should cover about the syllabus. We would cover info about face coverings, but we're not actually meeting face-to-face. Exams. So there will be 4 unit exams in this class. Essentially, the schedule is broken up into units. So let's jump back to the schedule. So essentially, each page here is 1 unit. Each unit is 3 chapters. So our first unit starts today. We do chapters 1, then chapter 2, and then chapter 3. So all in order, and then we have an exam over chapters 1, 2, and 3. The exams are generally on, say, a Friday and Saturday at the end of that unit. So our first exam will open September 18th and close September 19th. Since it's accessible through Canvas, essentially what you'll do is just go to that assignment in Canvas, click it, take the quiz. Exam 1 is 60, 70, or 80 multiple choice questions. One of those numbers is correct. So multiple choice questions, you do that exam. You can use notes, you can use your textbook. I do recommend in studying for these exams, read over the notes that you take during these lectures, maybe even write a note card. So like a 5x6, a 3x5, something like that, so that you can have a quick reference for things that you're not remembering very well as you're studying. I find students who do that use it very little and do a really good job studying as well. So that note card idea is really good. The exams generally have a time limit of about an hour. I'll let you know as they get closer, as well as in Canvas, it will tell you their time limit too. So they have a time limit of about an hour. You have about 60 questions, multiple choice, and so you'll have about an hour to take it within that time. So let's say you know you're going to be on vacation. Your best friend has a wedding on the 18th, and you'll be out of town on the 19th as well. Out in the mountains, you're not going to have access to internet. Let me know that in advance so I can open up the exam for you, say like the 16th and 17th. So taking any exam late will result in a penalty, a late penalty, no matter what the reason. So definitely if you know in advance that you're going to be out of town, let me know in advance and we can open up the exam early for you. So again, you have those 2 days to schedule your time, figure out your work schedules, those kinds of things, to have a good hour, maybe even 2 hours to do some more studying, prep, and make sure that technology is working. Because you definitely want a good internet connection. You don't want to fail an exam just because the internet shut out. If that kind of thing happens, we can work around it too. All right, so I think that's all we need to talk about for exams. Read the rest of this, though, as well. Late work, there is a penalty of 10% per day for any late work. So let's say, for example, you finish Chapter 1 Smart Book a day late. Well, you might have read through 100% of the chapter, but if it's a day late, you'll only get 90% max grade. So that works with question papers as well. If you turn them in a day late or too late or further, the points go down up until a week. I won't accept late work after a week. So, and definitely remember, as I'm going through any of this material, feel free to use the chat box to ask any questions. If I'm not covering enough about the late work or things like that, if you're confused about something with the exams, let me know. It looks like Richard has a question. Go for it, Richard. You can feel free to type it, or you could also use your microphone and ask it that way.
Yeah, is 94 an A or is it 93? Is that a campus-wide thing? Because I thought most of the time 93 was A's and 90, but I don't know. That might just be yours, or I didn't know if that was a campus-wide thing or not.
That's a good question. The last time I checked this was the psych department's grading breakdown, but I should definitely check if there is something different from that school-wide policy, because I know this was department policy, but it may have been updated more recently than I have updated these percentages. So thanks for bringing that to my attention. If it is that 93 would be an A, then I will change that and adjust it to the campus-wide policy. So thanks for that. All right, are there any other questions? I see you are reading ahead, Richard. So, yep, one of the next things is that course grades. So these are the breakdowns. Assuming these are the total points that we have in the class, if we say have to skip an assignment or something like that, the total points might drop, and that might adjust these points here. But you can always tell what your final grade would be based on these percentages. So if we end up having to delete a question paper or something like that, it would drop down to like 820 total points. So just revise your calculations based on that. Canvas should do that by itself in its own gradebook as well. Another thing to know, we talked about the SmartBook assignments, question papers. So question paper, we'll talk about these in a lot more detail in a week or two. Essentially, these are research papers about a topic that interests you. Maybe as we are talking about a topic in the course, you learn a little bit about social psychology, maybe some experiments, and you're like, oh, I wonder if there's other interesting social psychology experiments. So you can go and do your own research, find a research paper, find maybe a web source that's reputable as well, and write a one-page paper about that and include citations, write it in APA format, and we'll talk about what those things mean in more detail in a little while. You might have used MLA format in other classes. In psychology courses, we use APA, which is American Psychological Association format. So, and essentially that's a one-page paper on a topic that interests you. Some of your interests that you talked about a minute ago when you introduced yourself might be something that you want to look into for the question papers. I do recommend they be on like around the topics that we're studying in the chapters at that time, but they don't have to be. So if you're really, really interested in trauma therapies, your first, second, third, and fourth question paper could all be on different research articles and different types of trauma therapy. That would be totally acceptable, as long as they're all different papers with new sources that are making new points. All right, group discussion activities. Essentially, we'll do these a lot of the time in this format. On Microsoft Teams, I'll break you off into groups. You'll also work on this group presentation, both on Microsoft Teams as well as on your own time. So group discussion activities, these are things that happen during lecture time, versus this group presentation is a big presentation that you'll prepare over the course of the semester. So if we go to the schedule, on the first day back after exam one, we are going to learn a lot more about this presentation, and we're going to select groups. So do keep in mind people that are sharing interests with you up until that point. So we'll select groups, we'll select topics, and you'll learn a little bit more about what we're doing. So the final deliverable for that assignment is either a recording of you and your group. You can make it in this kind of setting, so a Microsoft Teams or a Zoom meeting where you're presenting slides, or you might just upload your slides by themselves. You never have to say anything. There'll be a couple different ways to do that. If you're doing just the slides, you'll want to have some note pages, but again, we'll talk about it on September 22nd in a lot more detail. And if you look through, we'll work on with our groups on October 6th. We'll work with them again on November 3rd. And then these assignments are due here on December 5th. So you'll have some time to work with them on them in class, but a lot of the work on this group presentation will be done out of class. So if, for example, your group presentation is on treatments for disorders, you'll work on that. Maybe you set a time every week that works for everybody, or every other week. You decide research to look into. You all read the sections in the book. You come together a couple times to make some slides, and that's what you turn in on December 5th. All right. Again, we'll talk in a lot more detail on September 22nd, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of idea of what that kind of group presentation is. The signature assignment and reflection paper, that goes into your e-portfolio. Essentially, that's one of your assignments at the end of the semester that you think really demonstrates your work well. You turn that in as your signature assignment, and then you write a short one-page reflection on the course, how that paper specifically demonstrates your learning in the course, that kind of thing. And a final note, the syllabus is subject to change. Let's say we all have to change and do completely online and not any broadcasts or something like that. We might have to update things. So your schedule is also in your syllabus. And something that might be really useful to you is on this last page of the syllabus. One, it tells you when the final exam will be. It'll be open on the 14th and 15th. So if you know you're going to be out of town already at that time, let me know and we can open up that final exam for you early. We won't be able to take it later in the case of the 4th exam. And that will be semi-cumulative. It'll mostly be over the final 3 chapters that we cover, which are 9, 13, and 12. But there will be questions from units 1, 2, and 3 as well. So it's semi-cumulative, mostly focused on the final 3 chapters. All right, so you can keep track of your points here. Canvas does a pretty good job. The grade book works fairly well as long as things are being turned in on time. Sometimes when they're turned in late, it doesn't auto update, especially for smart books. So if that kind of thing happens, let me know. Say, hey, I turned in my smart book a day late. Just send me a screenshot of your work that it shows completion. I'll enter the grade manually in that case. But generally, Canvas does a pretty good job. So you can keep track of your points and have an idea of what your final grade will be. So questions over the syllabus or anything that we've talked about up to this point. I'm going to scroll through and see if there's anything I've missed. All right, if there are any questions, feel free to put in the chat box that you have a question. We'll move on from the syllabus. One of the least exciting things to talk about in any class, but one of the most important as well, to know what's coming, what's expected. So let's move on from that unless you've got other questions. Maybe I'll just minimize these in case we need them. All right, so let's talk about psychology. The first thing we'll talk about is heroism. So here is a video. It might not, we'll see how well this works or doesn't work with using my microphone and my audio. Let me know at the end of this short video if the audio was just absolutely terrible. Terrible. That's not a word.
deadly train attack in Portland. 3 people were stabbed, 2 fatally, when they tried to help a Muslim woman and her friend. ABC's Danya Bacchus has the latest. The mother of the surviving victim of a fatal train attack in Portland. If he hadn't been there, thanking the man who helped save her son's life, then there would be 3 dead people today. Micah Fletcher, seen here giving the thumbs up from his hospital bed, was one of the 3 men who police say tried to intervene and stop 35-year-old Jeremy Christian's anti-Muslim tirade Friday. He told us to go back to Saudi Arabia and to get out of his country. Destiny Mangum was sitting with a Muslim friend who was wearing a hijab when police say Christian, an alleged white supremacist who has a criminal history, began hurling insults at the women. Fletcher, 23-year-old Talisha Namkai Maishe, and 53-year-old Army veteran Rick Best tried to calm him down, but police say Christian stabbed all 3.
All right, how was the audio there, first of all, before we ask any questions about the video itself? Good? All right.
Frighteningly better than any audio I've heard from a video like that.
All right, well, I guess my low-tech version of sticking a microphone by a speaker was a good one then. All right, so let's talk about this then, what happened here and about the heroism of these 3 people. So these were the 3 heroes in this situation. We learned just a little bit about them from that short news report. Why do you think these people acted in this kind of situation? There were other people on the train, obviously. Why did these 3 people act, and why are they maybe different than the other people on the train who did not act? What are some ideas? Maybe say just raise your hand here in the chat. Say, I've got a comment or hand or something like that, and then I'll call on you. Go for it, Julie.
Well, for one, the veteran, I thought that, you know, that sort of training in life, both physical and psychological, as someone in the military, that I think he's kind of trained to be heroic. The other 2, I'm not sure what the psychology of heroism is for them.
Yeah, that's a good prediction, though. So Ricky John Best did have training in the military, right? He was a veteran, so maybe that played some part in this action. But like you said, these other people, they didn't have that training, so maybe that was a part of the motivations for Ricky, but not the other 2. So really good comments there. So we've got, I'll answer Don's question right here. These 3 were not friends with each other, nor were they friends with the 2 girls who were getting assaulted. So the 2 girls who were getting assaulted, they were friends, but these were just other passerbys, bystanders on the train who then took these actions. So let's go to Ariel. Do you have some comments in addition to Julie's?
Yeah, I think that it probably has to do with their own personal experiences or morals or beliefs that cause them to act. For example, I guess if you've had prior experience dealing with an issue where you felt empowered to stand up or help, you could probably do it again, kind of a thing.
Yeah, definitely. So maybe they had experience doing this kind of thing before. Maybe they had other experiences helping people, even if it wasn't such heroic helping as this. Yeah, definitely. Maybe some of their morals and their own personal ideologies played into this. Yeah, that could definitely even be the case for someone who had military training too. Maybe that, as well as some of their own internal morality, had a part in this. Good. So let's hear from Miriam as well.
So maybe also kind of in the sense of power, The guy who was attacking was a white male. These are also white males, so they're kind of like on the same level as him when we view like power in society. So maybe that's why they felt more comfortable sticking up rather than maybe somebody else.
Yeah, we don't really know anything, at least from that news story, about the demographics of the rest of the train car. But yeah, it's possible that maybe they felt like maybe it was more their responsibility because they were similar in some ways to the person attacking. Good. So, any other comments or ideas on why these three individuals would have acted heroically when other people did not? All right. Well, I think it's really interesting that some of these points that you've pointed out there, personal ideology or personal morals, their previous training, some of the things that we've seen in research on heroes are exactly that. So people who have a habit to be pro-social, whether it's holding the door open for people all the way up to volunteering frequently in their lives, they're more likely, people who develop that kind of habit are more likely to act heroically. People who have specific training, say lifeguard training, are much more likely to, say, jump into a rushing river or a freezing river to save someone than someone who doesn't have that kind of lifeguard training. So military training probably played a big impact here. Micah David Cole Fletcher here, he writes, well, at this time, he wrote anti-fascist poetry. So white supremacy was something that he was familiar with and already fighting against. It was against his own personal ideology. So that might have made him more likely to act in that situation as well. So it's really interesting that from just that short news thing, we can find and make some hypotheses that then we could, say, do research on, see if there's been research in heroism that answers that, see if you're right, see if maybe we found more than that or there's other ideas as well. So good job with your hypotheses there, everybody. If you had any other ideas, maybe it's something we should look into in heroism. So let me know and I can do the research and you can join in it as well. There's been in previous semesters students who have gotten interested in the research that I've mentioned, and I've either been able to put them in contact with people doing that research or had them jump on teams with me and other colleagues that I'm working with to do the research we're doing too. So as an example, we made a toolkit to help young people around high school to early in college age. So, I mean, early in college people come back to college at many ages. I think the eldest student that I ever had that I knew their age anyway, was 85. So you can come back to school at any time. But we created a tool for people about age 14 through 25 to find a little more purpose in their life. And we wanted to translate it into Spanish. I don't actually speak Spanish though. So one of the students that I told about this project was really interested in that, helped us find different videos that would help with Spanish speaking people who had then immigrated to the US that might connect with them better than the things that we had created for English speaking people who had never immigrated at all. So things like that can be really interesting research opportunities. If you want to know more about a topic, email me and I can hopefully get you more information or even in contact with people who do that kind of work. All right, sorry, that's kind of a side tangent to this, but relevant to the class. So yeah, why did these heroes intervene? Why didn't others intervene? That's what we've been talking about. A lot of human behavior causes us to ask these kinds of questions. And so what a lot of psychologists do is they see human behavior and then they ask questions about it. So why do people do this? Or why don't people do this? Why does this tend to be the average? Or why does this tend to be abnormal? Those kinds of things. So these are all really individualistic questions, and psychology for a really long time has focused on individuals. So why were those three individuals motivated to take heroic action? But more recently, psychology has looked at more broad pictures, so more broad context, more broad situations. Why is the culture, why is the time affecting people in specific ways? So the mayor in this video actually specifically cites the broader political climate in their discussion about this act.
Two men lost their lives standing up to somebody spewing hateful words directed at Muslim passengers on an afternoon commuter train. These two men died heroes as a result of a horrific act of racist violence, and another man was injured. Those who have lost their lives have been identified. 53-year-old Ricky John Best of Happy Valley, Oregon. He was an Army veteran killed on Memorial Day weekend. He provided distinguished service to the residents of this community as an employee of the city of Portland. 23-year-old Talishan Mirdan Namkaimesh of Southeast Portland. A man who was injured in the attack has been identified as 21-year-old Micah David Cole Fletcher of Southeast Portland. They were all attacked because they did the right thing. My heart goes out to the friends and family of those who've lost their lives. And my thoughts are with the gentleman injured in the attack. We will do everything in our power to ensure that people of all races and ethnicities are safe in our city. There is too much hatred in the world right now, and far too much violence. Our current political climate allows far too much room for those who spread bigotry. Violent words can lead to violent acts. All elected leaders in America, all people of good conscience, must work deliberately to change our political dialogue.
So that's an example of both individualistic motivations discussed as well as the broader context, how it might have affected this kind of situation. And so psychology traditionally has focused only on those individual topics, but more recently it's looked at those more broader pictures. So you might see that as connecting to things like social psychology. So social psychology did a good job early in the beginning of social psych, looking at small groups, how small groups interacted, how they affected the leaders of the groups, the individual members of the groups, and a lot of that research then kind of expanded. Researchers in social psychology started working with people who are doing sociology research. So sociology researchers generally look at the society level as a first step. And so psychologists and sociologists have a lot more in common now than they did early on in the fields. So we will also often work side by side, looking at the causes of human behavior. So we're running lower on time, but this other video, feel free to watch it through your slides. The religious leader in the community, the imam of this specific congregation that the two girls were a part of, talks about the community context, how the community is coming together to support all the people that are part of their congregation. So just another example of how the community can affect individual people behavior. Talks about the donations to the church itself or the mosque itself. So when we ask questions like this, we can ask things like, well, how might have the religious context influence this event? How did the community context influence this event? How did they affect what happened then as well as what happened after the event? So we can look at the broader environment for causes for any kind of act. The heroism, the racist attack as well. We can look at individual motivations as well as other causes outside in the broader social context, the broader social environment. So this is two models of systems that affect development of people. This is Bronfenbrenner's bioecological systems model, just two different ways that it's drawn. I find this one on the right a little easier to read, but both of them essentially give just different examples of what you might find. So you have any individual, you, me, your cousin, your daughter, your friend, they're an individual. They have their own self. They are a certain age. They have different health problems or things that are good. So that's their own individual level. So psychology for a long time has looked at that. And then the microsystem is the system of things that we're interacting with on a day-to-day basis. So over the summer, you might not have really been interacting with school on a day-to-day basis. Now that the semester has started again, you might be interacting with school on a day-to-day basis again, right? So you family, you're probably interacting with some members of your family or friends on a day-to-day basis. So that is going to have a lot of impact on you, right? And then the next that I want to talk about is this exosystem. This is things like neighbors, social services, industries, the local politics, so like the city, maybe the county, maybe even the state, and how those affect our access to, say, local churches or local schools, things like that. So again, remember, anytime throughout this, feel free to just chat and say raise hands if you've got questions, because the little raise hand button doesn't seem to actually be sending me notifications. So I'm sorry about that. I'll see if I can find a way to fix that. And then the macro system are more the attitudes and ideologies of a culture. So you might think of the general culture of the U.S. South versus the Pacific Northwest or the U.S. as a whole. And so that would be part of the macro system. So each of these systems can affect an individual, affect their motivations, affect their behavior, how they think. And so psychology has done a lot better job moving from just this individual level to looking at this broader picture. So it looks like a lot, and it is kind of a lot, but we'll break it down. We'll look into studies of maybe connections between social services and family, as an example. Any given research article you look at is not going to be trying to look at this whole big picture, but a couple pieces of that picture. And then multiple researchers looking at any given topic will kind of give a better picture of this whole big picture. So just like the definition we looked at earlier in the textbook, psychology is the scientific study of behavior and mental processes. So as well as behaviors from these models, mental processes are also affected by different aspects of these models. So what is scientific? So that definition, the scientific study of behavior and mental processes, science is a process. It's a systematic method. So you might have heard it referred to as the scientific method. And essentially it's a way that we observe things. We observe heroic behavior, for example. We describe what happened. We describe what people might be feeling during it, what they might have experienced, their emotions. We're describing the event itself. We might use that then to predict the next time that kind of situation happens. We might predict, well, maybe someone who's a veteran might be more likely to intervene. We might make that prediction. And then we try to explain these kinds of situations, people's behavior, their mental processes. And that is what we try to do in this kind of systematic method. We use experiments, we use quasi-experiments, correlational studies, and we'll talk a little bit later about, we might not get to it until next Tuesday, what a quasi-experiment is versus an experiment versus a correlational study. But what are some example studies that you know of, whether it be an experiment, and let's try to keep it in psychology as well. If you can think of any kind of psychology study that you're aware of, what kind of science did they do in that study that you know of? Even if it was maybe unethical examples too, we can have those. Great, Parker. Go for it.
This isn't exactly what you're talking about at the moment, but I just observed this while we were talking about that attack. I looked up the obituary of Taliesin. I'm going to butcher that name. In his obituary, it says that the last words he said on the train was that he wanted everybody on the train to know that he loved them. So I just kind of observed as we were talking about, it's kind of obvious that the person with military experience stepped in to be a hero. Well, it sounds like one thought love mattered more than anything else. So he wanted to save these girls out of love rather than the hate that was being showed to them. So just wanted to bring that up.
Fantastic. I never even thought to look at their obituaries, but that's great. That's one thing that we have found in a lot of research on heroes is that not all of them, but very many of them have a lot of empathy. So that ability to feel what other people are feeling, as well as take the perspective of other people. And a lot of them do tend to have a lot more compassion and concern, or what you might call love as well for people. And they expand that kind of concern, not just to, say, family members or close others, but they expand that to the world. So that makes a lot of sense, saying, I want everybody on the train to know I love them. That's a really good observation that we can then use to maybe predict if there are other people who have that same sense of loving others, they might be more likely to act heroically. So really great. Thank you. Yes, very beautiful. Thank you for that comment. All right, so Don also had a comment about either the studies or the heroes. Go for it, Don.
The study, just the one that came to my mind was the rat park. I think that has to do with this. Do you know what I'm talking about, or should I explain it?
Yeah, go ahead and explain it. I don't know of it by the term rat park, but yeah, describe it and we'll talk about it.
Okay. And I think it was in regards to the Vietnam War, but so they did the original study as like the rat, they put him in a cage and then put I want to say it was cocaine infused water on one side, and then the other side just had regular water, and then it was meth or some type of drug, and he got the rat, got addicted to the drug and eventually died or whatever. But someone else redid the study, saying that he didn't quite, have all the factors, and so what he how he redid it was he made like this, rat amusement park, and just like tons of fun things, huge cage, other rats to be social with, and again they had the drug infused water on one side and then the regular water on the other, and a few of them tried it, but none of them got addicted to it at all, and because it was their environment, right? And so it really isn't. And so like in regards to the Vietnam War, because they were all getting addicted to drugs over there, and they thought that they were going to come back and have this huge drug problem when they came back, but they were surprised that like they didn't, and that's when they kind of like realized that, the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection. When you're connecting to other people and when you are happy, then you can pretty much quit drugs, cold turkey, and it's not going to like affect you, but it's, yeah, anyway.
Yeah, that's a great example. I hadn't actually heard that specific study before, so I'll definitely go and look that up. But it brings up a lot of critical points about the science of psychology. So that original researcher, they did an experiment, they had it controlled, they were trying to look at these variables. So the addiction and what the rat would do, which would it pick, and then that really says a lot about the more recent areas of psychology, looking at the broader perspective. Oh, nice. That is one really nice thing about having the online classes. There is the TED Talk right there. So really useful in the chat box for anybody looking for it. So thank you very much, Ariel. But yeah, we can look at other aspects of the context. So what about social environment? If there are other rats or other people in that kind of situation, does the behavior change? If there are more interesting things, if maybe the rats have other purposes, what about if it's mother rats caring for their children, things like that? So there's a lot of other aspects of these situations that we can look at. And so we can take those original studies, even some of the unethical ones that you might already be aware of in, say, social psychology or some earlier studies, and we build on those. So we say, well, I think that researcher might have missed like this piece, or this might be another aspect that can explain that. Do a new study, explain even better, explain even more, and then the field as a whole learns more. So really good example of doing systematic work, realizing that we can do things better over time, getting better at our observations, getting better at our descriptions, getting better at our predictions, and getting better at those explanations. So really great example, even though I hadn't heard of that one before. So does anybody else have any studies that they would like to describe and talk about in relation to the science of psychology? This is definitely one of those weaknesses of the online broadcast system. I don't know if someone's maybe typing and going to say they have a comment, and I'm not really able to stare down students as much and be like, do you have a comment? Not that I usually do that, but there's definitely that pressure from the authority figure in the room to be like, someone's got a comment here, and everybody feels a little more uncomfortable, versus now it's just me that probably feels uncomfortable when nobody's talking, because I'm like, oh, why is nobody talking? Psychology. Anyway, behavior. So behavior are things that we can directly observe. So just give me some examples of behavior. Maybe just type out an example of a behavior in the chat box. It can be anything. Things that we directly observe. So we've got fidgeting. Yep, exactly. Yeah, for seeking approval, specifically, what kinds of directly observable behaviors would you say would indicate seeking approval? Eye contact is a great example of a behavior we can directly observe. You might notice sometimes my eyes are contacting the camera up here, sometimes they're contacting the screen below. So yep, eye contact is a good directly observable behavior. I don't think seeking approval is a bad example, but we should think about breaking it down further than that. So if you're seeking approval, so for example, I might be seeking approval from the students in the class. I want students to like me to then like the class maybe a little more or something like that. So what might I do? My behavior might be a little more energetic. So you might see, if you're observing someone who's seeking approval, they might be asking more questions or give more eye contact. They might ask more questions of the person they're seeking approval for. So those kinds of behaviors that you might be able to observe, or say maybe you just see through a camera or see through like some kind of observational method. So that's what we're talking about for behaviors. And then we can then interpret it as being or describe, well, all these behaviors that we're observing, that might be seeking approval. Forced laughs for seeking approval. Yep. Exactly. So really great examples there for everybody. Very good. All right. Some other things that we can look for in a classroom setting. We might be able to see the number of times a student raises their hand. We might be able to count, for example. I can count in the chat how many times different students have made a comment, something like that. How many cups of coffee I drink. So I'm still on my first thermos if anyone's counting. How fast a rat runs through a maze. So that would be a behavior we could observe, and we could time that behavior. So we want to use systematic methods to measure any kind of behavior. So if we want to look at eye contact, well, we could look at how many times eyes are connecting between two people, how many times a person does directly look at a camera. There are also really sophisticated tools that you can place in front of children to watch where their eyes are contacting. So you can measure, well, on this page of maybe text and pictures or different colors and shapes, where exactly is that child looking? So that is an observable behavior that you might not be able to get that specific of an observation just with your eyes, But if you use this special tool, you're getting an observation, a systematic observation of that kind of behavior of tracking eyes. So, all right, mental processes. So mental processes encompasses a whole lot. So with that, we're talking about thoughts. So what are you thinking right now? Your cognition. So how do you think? How do you process a math problem? How do you process thinking about what you're going to say to your best friend the next time you talk to them? How do you feel things? So that's a mental process, right? And what is motivating you? What are you thinking about before you do any specific behavior? So we can look at also things like we can even make some direct observations that might be connected to mental processes. So if you use things like an MRI, you can see areas of the brain. You can observe different areas of the brain that have more blood flow, more electrical activity, and make note also of things like what a person is thinking. They can report to you what they're imagining or things like that. So mental processes are a lot harder to directly observe. Rather than behaviors, we can't really directly observe exactly the process that's going in mentally. We can observe some physiological things when someone's feeling motivated, right? So they might be more alert, more attentive if they're feeling motivated versus a little more lethargic. But we can't always see all the mental processes that are going through. We might not know why they're motivated. Maybe they're motivated because of a chemical, right? Maybe a drug that they've used, or maybe they're motivated because they really want to get something done before an exam, or they really like the task that they're involved with. So we can't necessarily directly observe those things. So we have to use other observations and then infer about that. All right, so, yes, this. So I forgot to mention this as we talked about the syllabus, but everybody, before you even have any points in this class, you can get extra credit. So one thing that's really helpful, especially since we're going to be doing this broadcast class and sometimes we'll just be able to see each other's faces, is putting a picture onto your Canvas profile. My Canvas profile picture is for some reason gone and it won't upload. I think my picture might be just too big. So if you get a picture onto your Canvas profile before next Tuesday, I'll give you 5 extra credit points. So you might have extra credit before you even have class points. So to do that, just go to Canvas. Let's see if I can do that right now. So you can go to Canvas, you can go to your own account, and you can add a picture there. It might need to be a little small, like a small file size, because I've had some trouble getting mine to work, but I'll get mine up too. All right, so how do psychologists go about observing, describing, predicting, and explaining? How do we do this? Well, with research. We use research methods. So that's actually one of the other courses I teach is research methods. So what do you need to do research? Well, some of the main things you need are critical thinking, you need curiosity, you need skepticism, you need objectivity. So let's talk about what each of those things are. So with critical thinking, we're really trying to understand behavior and mental process. So why would critical thinking be important? Why would you say critical thinking would be important for understanding behavior and mental processes? Feel free in the chat just to say hand or something like that. Or you could even type out your own response in the chat and don't have to necessarily use your microphone. Yep, that's definitely true, Ariel. If you're not thinking about something, you definitely aren't going to be able to understand it. So that reminds me of earlier today, I was helping my daughter with her math homework. She's schooling at home with not resources from us, but like the teacher sends her assignments and whatnot. So she was trying to do her math. I was like, okay, so you see this 5 plus 2 equals 7. Watch, I get the simple math problem wrong. And 5 plus what equals 7? What's in there? And she's like, I don't know. I'm like, well, let's think about it. And she's like, I don't know how to think about it. So the day ended up pretty good. She ended up getting those questions right. So good question though, Julie. Can you be objective? So it's a really good question. So if we're just critically thinking about things, we might not be able to. That's why we need some of these other pieces too. So we can try to be objective, but a lot of us do have biases, even as psychologists, we do. So that's why we do a lot of these different things. So we try to think critically. So we might even think critically, am I being objective about this topic? So I really like heroism. I really like the train of thought and the train of research that looks at the empathy and the love and compassion heroes have in motivating their decisions. So when I care about that so much, am I maybe ignoring other aspects that might be important too? So I need to think critically about that. So really good points. So Carter says thinking critically can allow you to point out important details. Yeah, really good point. So you can, when you think critically about something, you might mull it over, you might notice things that you wouldn't otherwise. So not everything is black and white. You'd need to think more deeply about why someone is behaving in any certain way. Yeah, very good, Destiny. So looks like to get to the root of things. Yeah, very good. So we definitely need critical thinking to be able to understand these concepts, these behaviors, these mental processes. All right, so with critical thinking, we're talking about thinking actively, thinking deeply, just like Nicholas says there, looking deeper beyond just the surface level of any process, look to try to get to the root of things. With that, you might evaluate evidence. So this might be evidence you've seen yourself, like anecdotal evidence. This might be evidence from, say, a graph or from a study that you've done yourself. So, yeah. Creativity is also important. So for critical thinking. So when you can think, it's a cliche to say outside the box, but when you can think slightly differently about a problem, think about it creatively, think about trying to answer the question in a creative way, it can help a lot with your critical thinking as well. Oh, with that, in this course, you might come upon information that I say, that other students say, that the book says, that the research articles say, that you read, that doesn't fit or conflicts with the current knowledge that you have. So with that, think critically about that. Look at the sources of this information. So earlier we heard about the rat study, right? And I had not heard of that specific one, but we got a link to that so we can start to go and check those sources, right? So ask questions, challenge our own preconceptions, and we might even need to revise some of the ways that we think and our own perspective. So one good example of this is left versus right brain. So can anybody, probably with audio, describe the idea of being left versus right brain?
So what I've heard about left and right brain is if you're more of a left brain person, then you're more like logical. And if you're more right brain person, you're more creative. Is that kind of the direction you're going with this?
Yeah, exactly, Ariel. And that's a really great description. So that if you're more one side of your brain, you're more creative, or the other side of your brain, you're more logical. So great job. In reality, there is no left brain versus right brain. So you might have had that assumption even up to this point, but I'm here saying there's no left versus right brain. So there are people who maybe because of seizures, for example, they might have had a whole hemisphere of their brain removed. They can still survive. They can still do most tasks, especially if that happens early on in life. They can still be incredibly creative or incredibly logical or both. So there, our whole brain essentially, and we'll talk a lot more about this in neurology, but for most tasks, our whole brain is involved in it. So language processing, for example, is processed like in the lobe right here on the left side of your head. With the camera, that might not look like left side to you, but touching the left side of my head. So there are areas of the brain that focus more on doing things. So most of your memories are processed at some point through the very middle of your brain, things like that. Your prefrontal cortex is involved with higher order thought, like planning, thinking ahead, long-term goals. thinking about moral decisions, so that part up here in the front. But beyond those kinds of specific kind of areas of the brain, most all of our decisions and our behaviors are using a lot of the brain, more than 10%, as well as not just left versus right. So if you're a really creative person, you're using a lot of your brain. If you're a really logical person, you're using both sides of your brain as well. So, and here is a video I'm linking here, so you can start checking some sources, watching a video that's in more detail about that. So let's continue talking about how we do science. And curiosity is a big part of it. So scientists like myself are curious about how things work and why things change the way they do, how people interact with each other the way they do. My specific interests are things like heroism and pro-social behavior. Why do some people help or do good for others and some people do not in those situations? Why do some people even put their lives at risk or their careers at risk to whistleblow about things? So curious people are often asking questions, trying to learn, and that's one thing that you need to do in science. When we talked about these heroes, we had a couple people come up with some hypotheses. You might have come up with some of those same ones or even different ones. When you're being curious, that's what you're doing. Skepticism. So skepticism is asking questions about things other people take for granted. So for example, you might have heard your entire life that you're either left brain or right brain, or that you're a specific personality type or something like that. So you can ask questions about that. Well, why do you say that? Or what makes me that way? Or is this a really valid way to label someone as left versus right brain? So asking questions about things that people take for granted. We might see behaviors and think we assume why something is happening, but then in studying it, we might see, well, maybe part of that's true, but maybe it's a lot of this other thing that's happening here. So research questions often emerge from unexpected human behavior. As an example, most people would say that they would help someone who they were seeing struggling or in pain. But when you look at the examples of the bystander effect, a lot of people don't help in those kinds of situations. Heroes on that train, very few people stood up to help, right? So that's kind of an unexpected human behavior. Sometimes those unexpected behaviors are really positive, sometimes they're negative. So seeing that, so why does bystander behavior exist? How did the Holocaust happen? Those kinds of things. So you might have assumptions, but it is really fun to find counterintuitive results. If you think it's because everybody's had training, but then not everybody's had training to do heroic action. If you think it's all because of empathy, but then for some people it's not because of empathy. That's really interesting, and then you can dive more deeper. You can do more studies to understand that even better. So skeptic, I think this is a really key thing to understand with skepticism. The skeptic doesn't mean a person who's doubting, but a person who investigates or who researches, as opposed to a person who asserts and thinks that they've found. So someone who will question and investigate there and maybe even doubts in the sense that they're wondering if this is all that is why. I think the quote was better than how I just tried to describe the quote, but that's okay. Hopefully you got the point. And then objectivity. So this goes back to a statement Julie made earlier. So how can we be objective? Can we be objective? We want to see things as they really are, not just how the researcher wants them to be. So when I have a hypothesis, that's my expectation of how something's going to happen, but I've got to see how things really are. I can't see just what I want to happen, right? So we need to have things based on evidence, and to get that good evidence, we need empirical methods. So empirical methods are things like double-blind studies, are good research methods, are, well, let's get some examples. So can anyone describe what a double-blind study is, and maybe an example context of when it would be used? So I'll give one clue to the second part. The double-blind studies are often used in medical research trials. So let's say, for example, medicine. So trying out a new medicine.
Just look at the efficacy. I mean, that's what they use them for, I think.
Sorry, I didn't hear the very beginning of what you were saying. Would you mind repeating it?
Yeah, I guess in medical studies, do they just use them to see if the treatment is effective or not? That way, neither the researcher nor subject, I guess, knows whether they're getting the treatment or not, so they can't kind of skew their own results by knowing, I suppose. I don't know.
Yep, that's exactly right. So this picture here is kind of a joke, but it would be kind of a similar situation to this. The researcher would have, say, the drug that they were using. Let's say the drug was actually drug A. And they want to see, does drug A work or does B help this treatment? And let's say B is sugar water or a sugar pill, so a placebo or something like that. So you've got the real drug, you've got a fake one, and the researcher isn't going to be the one handing those out to the people. They have, say, a lab tech hand that out. So the researcher has, say, a computer printout of who's getting the real drug and who's not. But the person who's giving out that medicine, they don't know if this pill is a sugar pill. They don't know if it's the actual drug. They might not even know that they're in part of a double-blind study. And then the subject receiving that, or the patient receiving that, they don't know either. They don't know. They should have signed consent that they might be getting a sugar pill, but they won't know if what they're actually holding is that sugar pill or not. And you're exactly right. They do that because they don't want anybody to bias the results. They don't want the researcher or the person passing out that medicine to know that person A versus person B is getting the drug, or person 1 versus person 2. And that is a double-blind study. So the researcher as well as the participant don't know who's getting the treatment versus not. And that can really help reduce bias, and that's a lot more objective, because even though that researcher might have made this drug themselves, they might have a lot of vested interest on it working. But if they do this kind of double-blind study, maybe have their lab technicians actually run it without the lab technicians knowing what's the real drug and what's not, they can get better data to say if it is their drug or if a sample of a sugar pill does the same effect for whatever kind of disease they're trying to get at. So many people see psychology as focused on therapy, and we haven't really talked about therapy much today. Therapy's tools and techniques, the processes that are used to do therapy, are all researched as well. So they're improved upon by the scientific method. Different kinds of therapy techniques are used in different situations, and new ones are tested. They're tested with medicine as well as without medicine. So think of treatments for depression. So you can have treatments for depression like cognitive behavioral therapy. Because of research, we know it's pretty effective at helping support people with depression. Adding cognitive behavioral therapy as well as medicine can be even more effective, or in some cases just as effective as one or the other. So it's because of research that we have different therapies that can work. So we started off with, for example, Freud. This picture here looks a little bit like Freud, and we've moved from that point doing more research on these kinds of treatments. So now we can know different ways to support people and help them better because of these empirical ways that we found. So with that, we do things like child intervention and observation studies. So you might have children in a room, giving them different treatments, giving them different supports, different trainings. You can do research on public policy. So a policy changes so that everybody can vote by mail, for example, or only a specific segment of the population can vote by mail. And then you can look at the change in that policy. Maybe Medicaid is expanded to another segment of the population, and you can do research on that. See, well, how did it help? How did it hurt? Those kinds of things. So you can research public policy. Industrial organizational psychology is a pretty big and booming and growing area of psychology that uses these psychology research methods to look at businesses and organizations to try and make them run better, to have people work better together. As an example, A lot of IO psychology, industrial organizational psychology, has focused on helping doctors and nurses work better together so that they're communicating better, so they're getting better outcomes for patients, those kinds of things. So we can do a lot of research on a lot of different topics. Psychology isn't just therapy, but all of it does involve the science of psychology. So with that, we're going to move to this next section on the history of psychology. Your book covers the history of psychology in a lot of detail. We won't cover it in as much detail. I just want you to know a couple key players. I want to focus this class a lot more on contemporary psychology, where the field is today, because if you're going into a job in psychology, let's say you go on to get your bachelor's, get your master's, even get a PhD, I think it's going to be a lot more beneficial for you to know where the field's at now. And your book has some good discussion on the history as well. So we won't talk as much about history in the class. We'll kind of talk about what's happening today a little more. So the history of psychology really starts all the way back with ancient philosophers, Socrates, or if you like, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. They had a lot of ideas about the nature of thought, why people behave specific ways, mortality, the mind, the body, how they interacted. And so those ideas influenced a lot of psychologists, and even do today, and give hypotheses that we can test through research. So with that, psychology historically has been very Western and heavily influenced by white, generally men, throughout the entire history of psychology. So here's me, a white man, talking about this and saying, hey, that's kind of a problem, but we are definitely doing better. Well, not kind of a problem, that's definitely a problem. We have done a lot better job at bringing in other cultural influences. Those philosophers are, so we've got Greek philosophers, but we've brought in more influences of philosophers from other areas of the world as well, and more science and more methods from other cultures as well, other hypotheses, other ideas that we then are testing better now. And there's a lot more work in cross-cultural psychology. I mentioned industrial organizational psychology is growing and booming right now. Cross-cultural psychology is also a really big growing and booming field. So there's a lot of money for grants and research in cross-cultural studies. So if that's something that you're interested in, there's a lot of work being done right now looking at, well, we see psychology and describing and predicting things that are working out in the US, for example, but how does that apply to, say, Europe, Southern Africa, India, North versus South Korea? And you can see there might be some methodological concerns of getting into any given place, right? So contemporary approaches to psychology are essentially, throughout the chapters, we'll skim over these different approaches. So I want you to know about them. One of them is biological, another is psychodynamic, another is cognitive, evolutionary, behavioral, humanistic, and sociocultural. So depending on the topic we're talking about, the book might be coming at it from a behavioral perspective or a humanistic perspective, or kind of trying to take a perspective that includes a lot of these. So again, I'm kind of going over a lot of topics really quickly. If you've got questions, if something's really confusing and you feel like you should understand it and I've just done a poor job explaining it, let me know. Say in the comments, be like, hey, I didn't understand when you said this. I'll see that in the chat box and review that. So biological. When we're talking about biological approach to psychology, we're talking about things with the body and especially and very often the brain. So how do the bodily structures, how do neurology, how does that impact behavior, thoughts, mental processes, emotions? So this overlaps a lot with neuroscience. So neuroscience looks at the neurology of humans, the structure, the function, the development of neurons, the brain, how genetics are playing into our behavior, our mental processes, and the biochemistry of the nervous system. This also includes the endocrine system, so the hormone systems of your body and how those are feeding back and part of your nervous system. So lots of overlap here with the evolutionary approach to psychology as well. So that's one. You might have one researcher or one psychologist who takes maybe an exclusively biological approach. That's what they try to explain, predict, and use to look at human behavior and mental processes from. They might just use that biological approach. Maybe they use the biological and evolutionary approach to explain things. So the behavioral approach to psychology, remember back to examples of behaviors we were talking about earlier. So behaviors are things that you can see face to face, like, right, or you can make direct observations of behavior. So a rat running through a maze, making 5 mistakes, or finishing a maze in 20 seconds versus 25 seconds. So behavioral psychology dominated the first half of the 20th century. A lot of other aspects of psychology, like humanistic, were actually kind of a response to that, but it looked just at directly observable behaviors. So some theorists you might have heard of are Pavlov, John Watson, B.F. Skinner. So if you've taken a general psychology class in the past, you've probably heard those names. Maybe they ring some bells. Pavlov joke there. Have anybody got it? It's hard because I can't see many of your faces. I'll laugh at my own jokes. It's okay. And then you'll know they were jokes once I'm laughing at them. Oh, that was really bad. So focuses on, so the psychodynamic approach. This was, well, I'll show you some theorists. Freud is one of the biggest theorists in the psychodynamic approach. It focused on how unconscious thought might be affecting your behavior, your mental processes, how biological drives like sex and hunger interact with societal drives and pressures. Thanks for the chuckles in the chat. I appreciate that. It's very validating. Today, a lot of this psychodynamic approach focuses more on cultural and social experiences as a internal drive as a determinant of behavior. So back when Freud was talking about it, he talked a lot about the motivations of sex and hunger. Today, psychodynamic theorists have moved to a place where, as well as sex and hunger, they're also talking about, well, your cultural and social environments, your context, kind of push you towards different things as well. So you also have those as unconscious motivators. Humanistic psychology focuses on human growth, agency, positive human qualities. A lot of aspects of positive psychology grew out of humanistic psychology as well. So it rejects the idea that humans can be completely controlled by their unconscious motivations. So you can see it's kind of an answer to that psychodynamic approach with Freud. Yeah, some of Freud's ideas are super odd, and we'll definitely talk about them. You'll get a little more detail on his history in the textbook versus in class, but also if you're interested, you could definitely write a question paper on Freud and some of his ideas as well. But we will definitely be covering it in more detail in the class than we just covered right now. So with humanistic psychology, a lot of work currently in motivation, a lot of work in pro-social behavior, and a lot of work in heroism has connections to humanistic psychology. So you can see some of my perspective coming from a humanistic perspective, looking at humans growing, the idea that humans are capable of growth, the idea that humans can make choices, that they're not just unconsciously motivated, and that we do have positive qualities we can increase rather than only a focus on negative qualities or negative behaviors. Cognitive approaches to psychology, hopefully a lot of people, lay people who don't know about psychology are starting to understand more at the surface level what cognitive psychology is. It's that focus on the mental processes, things like attention, things like memory, perception, thinking, and how do we actually solve problems. So how does our brain work to mull a problem over and come to a solution? So cognitive psychologists see the mind as active and aware, that it can be active in solving a problem, that it's not just unconsciously motivated, and that we can get a sense of what's happening in the brain rather than only looking at observable behavior that a behaviorist might do. So it's a really popular perspective or a viewpoint to take in modern psychology. So cognitive approach is really popular today. The evolutionary approach is also really popular as well. So the primary basic ideas of the evolutionary approach are that a human adaptation Reproduction and natural selection can explain a lot of the behaviors, thoughts, and mental processes that humans have. So things like mate selection, things like group behavior, some of those might be able to be explained through evolutionary processes, as an example. So evolution has guided and affected different human behaviors. Anxiety and fear is a really good example. So a lot of problems therapists are dealing with today are anxiety disorders. So in our evolutionary past, we would have anxiety about things like maybe finding food, finding shelter, right? We still have those anxieties today. We also would have anxieties about, well, is there a saber-toothed tiger that's going to jump out and eat me? And so you hear a sound behind you, you get anxious in our evolutionary past. You turn around, it's either that tiger, you fight or flight, or it's nothing. It was actually a chipmunk, right? So in our evolutionary past, those kinds of anxieties tended to come up pretty suddenly, intensely, and then dissipate relatively quickly. So you found food over a couple days, or you didn't, right? So it's a little grim, but true. So with that, our biology has adapted over evolutionary time to to be anxious and then calm down fairly quickly. That doesn't work so well in modern day society when in a couple months you have a final exam. You might start having anxiety about that, especially since I'm talking about it right now. You might start to have anxiety about a final exam, and that won't leave until after that event has passed. Maybe you have anxiety about finding a new job. What's going to happen with a pandemic that's going on, right? So that one probably relevant in evolutionary past too, though. But a lot of our anxieties and a lot of these disorders seem to be caused by our body's natural response to anxiety and stressful situations, that we are essentially programmed biologically to have anxieties and get rid of them pretty quickly. But since we have these ongoing anxieties that are long-term in the kind of society we've constructed, it's causing problems with anxiety. So that's an example of this evolutionary approach and how it's relevant to problems today. So sociocultural approach looks at social and cultural aspects that might influence that behavior, mental processes. So cross-cultural research, like I mentioned, looks at how one culture might view or behave in a certain situation versus another culture, those kinds of things. U.S. researchers have been more and more focused on looking at more diverse ethnicities inside the U.S. too. So looking at those cultures even here in the U.S. So that's good that we're doing a better job, but there still is room for improvement there as well. So which of these approaches is best or correct? What's your favorite approach? So anybody can comment in the chat or even turn on their mic and comment. Which one do you think is best or the most useful? Maybe why? What's maybe a specific problem that you see maybe humanistic being best for, or cognitive or biological, or even psychodynamic, even though I was kind of hammering on Freud a little bit.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
I was just going to say, I don't know much about any of these, but I like the idea of humanistic. It feels like you have a little bit more control over things, like your brain is actively choosing to do things, versus psychodynamic is more of a pre-programmed response. So.
All right. It looks like we've got 2 votes for humanistic psychology. Oh, 3 votes. So maybe I did a good job describing that one. So it's definitely a perspective I'm coming from too, because of that aspect to choose. So Ariel, I'm not sure if that was intended to be a joke, but if I had to choose, humanistic, because you can choose with humanistic psychology versus psychodynamic. So yeah, can anybody think of a use, or because I mentioned cognitive psychology is very important today. Anyone think of any area where knowing how our brain processes problems? Good job, Ariel. how could cognitive psychology be really useful for understanding any kind of behavior or mental process? Yeah, Don, I think that's a really good example. Do you want to expound on that, child development? Because you're definitely right there.
Well, I don't know. There's a lot that goes with that. I mean, just kind of like how at different ages, different children start, portraying different types of behaviors and start talking and whatnot. And a lot of times you can kind of see like what children, are maybe autistic or whatnot because of their can't talk. How they are delayed developing. Oh my gosh, can't say that word, but yeah.
Yeah, that was great. Really good examples too. So if we can see standard or normative development, or then we can also see neurodivergent cognition as well. And if we can understand neurodivergent cognition, such as like ADHD or someone whose cognition is what we describe as autistic, right? Then we can know a little bit more about how they behave, how they might interact in different situations. Same with ADHD, it's neurodivergent. So you're thinking about things in different ways, you're cognitively processing things different ways. And then if we know the maybe normative cognitive development, then we can predict there too for child development. A really good example that came to me from your examples, Don, was language processing. How do we learn to speak correctly? Maybe I haven't. But another one was also young children, very young children. So infants, it doesn't appear that they cognitively see themselves as separate beings from, say, those people closest to them. Then as time goes on, they start to have that more sense of self. Then later on in adolescence, they have cognitively a sense of them as their own identity, these kinds of things. So yeah, cognitive is very important too. So which of these approaches is best or correct? Well, it's kind of a trick question because really all of them are important. So modern psychology takes all of them into account. So some of the explanations for group behavior and group dynamics, some of those might be biological, evolutionary, and as well as sociocultural. So why do we behave in groups specific ways? Well, maybe part of it's because evolutionarily it was adaptive. Maybe biologically we get a lot of positive chemicals and hormones through our bodies. And then also our society and our culture says, well, we should be part of these groups to help one another and be together, solve problems. Humanistic might also say, well, because we can choose to help people within groups, right? So all of these approaches can be useful. So this is a modern developmental theory. So it's very similar to Bronfenbrenner's model that I showed earlier in the class. So this is Lerner's developmental contextual model. And he used that same idea that there's lots of context, lots of situations that can affect a person's development. So this child here, you can think of it as the individual. They have their own cognition. So to understand that, you need cognitive psychology. They have their own biology. So they have their own hormones, all those kinds of things. They've got their own neural structure. Maybe they're a little neurodivergent. Maybe they're not. They have their own temperament, personality. They also maybe have parents or a social network or a school network that are influencing them. They have a community around them, a society, a culture. So all these things can be explained in different ways by different of these contemporary approaches to psychology. So your book tries to take it tries to take all of these approaches together in explaining things, and we'll try to do that through the course as well. But I definitely want to let you know that some of the areas that I have the most expertise in, so this is where some of my bias comes in, is humanistic and cognitive psychology, and then I'm learning more in this behavioral and evolutionary areas of psychology. Socio, I don't know, maybe I have some expertise in a lot of these, so, but I feel like a lot of my perspective is coming from humanistic as well as cognitive psychology. So just as a preface as we go into this class, and you'll see, for example, things that I might say that you're like, well, if we look at this from maybe an evolutionary standpoint, it might be a little different, things like that. So definitely something to be thinking critically about. So I think before we jump into these specific research methods, I think this would be a good place to end for the first day, especially because I know there's other students who have struggled with jumping into the class. It's a lot of content right at first. So before we go though, I'm assuming some of you have had kind of broadcast classes, have had online meetings, have used things like maybe Jitsi or Zoom or WebEx, things like that. For those of you who have had a broadcast class or done meetings like this where you're video chatting with people, just give your rating from 1 to 10 of Microsoft Teams as you've seen it today. So if you haven't ever used other software like this, that's all right. Don't feel the need to answer. But just out of 10, give your assessment of Microsoft Teams, not necessarily the content that we've covered today or things like that, but the interface, the ease of use, things like that. Just give me like from 1 to 10 of how you've liked the Teams experience specifically. And we haven't used too many features of it, I know. There's a lot of caveats there. But before we go, are there other questions that anybody has that we've mentioned but haven't been covered in depth from today? Things on the syllabus even, or the lecture to this point? Oh, Don, you use it for work. I might email you for help throughout the semester with it then. Seems pretty intuitive so far, though. Okay, great. Okay, that's good to know, Shaylin. That's the best one you've used so far. All right, is there any questions or anything we need to re-review today? I know there's in the first days of class, the first meeting or second meeting, there's a lot kind of crammed in before we can kind of breathe a little more and focus on individual topics. For example, research methods, getting a crash course in research methods. I usually teach a research methods course over an entire semester, but on next Tuesday, I'll teach it in 40 or so minutes. So I know it can be a lot and intense in the first couple days of a class. All right, for anyone watching this recording afterwards as well, if you have questions, do feel free to email those to me, and I can respond to them in the next class meeting or even just send you a direct email as well. But thank you all for being here for this meeting. I'll let you go for tonight, and I'll stop the recording, and I will see you again next Tuesday. As a reminder of your schedule, I will get your smart books working correctly so that you can do the assignment, because Smart Book Chapter 1 is due next Tuesday just before midnight. So have a good night, everyone.